Hi guys, welcome back to another sewing tutorial. Thank you so much for stopping by. Thank you for your likes, thank you for your comments, thank you for your engagement. I don't take it for granted. In today's video guys, we'll be learning how to sew a transparent corset. My last tutorial was on the pattern drafting. If you haven't watched the video, please go ahead and watch the pattern drafting. I'll be leaving the link in the description. So guys, without wasting much of your time, let's get right into the tutorial. So guys, let's get started. So guys, after drafting the pattern, the next thing to do is to cut out your fabric. Cut out your fabric using the pattern. So for the corset cup, I use the crepe, and for the other part, which is the front bodies and the back bodies, I used my skin net. People use a lot of things like corset mesh, um, um, fashion fabric, and a whole lot. But for this tutorial, this is a transparent corset. We're going to be making use of our tulle nets or skin nets or whatever you call it. So for the corset cup, guys, the main fabric and the lining that I cut out, I added 1/2 inch seam allowance round. And then for the wording, I just cut out the wording without any seam allowance. So I'll go ahead and use a cloth gum on the crepe, okay? So ensure that you stabilize your corset cup using either an SD or a cloth gum. For the front bodies and the back bodies cut on sew net, it was cut on a layer of 4 layers. And then I'll go ahead and join the front bodies to the back bodies. I'm going to be placing the seam allowance on the right side of the fabric. I don't know if you understand. We know that normally seam allowance is usually on the wrong side, but for this transparent corset, we'll be placing the seam allowance on the right side. I hope it makes sense. And then as this tutorial proceed, we'll get to find out why we actually placed, or I actually placed, the seam allowance on the right side. So at this point, I'll go ahead and align, and then I'll use my pins. Okay, so ensure that you work with your pins no matter how long you've been in the industry. Carefulness is very important. So I'll take it to my sewing machine after aligning it properly, and then I'm going to be stitching by 1/2 inch. Remember that while drafting the pattern, which is very important that you watch, we did not add any seam allowance on the pattern drafting. So we only added seam allowance on the main fabric while cutting out the fabric. So I've wrapped my regeline bone. I'm going to be showing you guys how I was able to achieve this. So you bring out a piece of fabric of two nets about 8 to 10 inches. You place it on fold. Make sure that everything is well aligned. So I'm going to be using my regeline bone, well ironed regeline bone, and then stitch it by the sewable part. Place it at the edge and then stitch it. So if you look at a regeline bone closely, you realize that there's a sewable part on both sides. Don't just stitch on any part of the regeline bone. There's a sewable part at the extreme of the bone, or at the end of the bone. So take your time and stitch gently. If you notice that at this point I was taking my time, okay, which you may not really see, but it's something that requires you to take your time. Be very careful with the tension of your machine. You don't just match it the way you're sewing your regular cotton. There's a particular tension to work with, most especially if you're working with tulle nets and bones. Okay, so you need to understand your machines while you're doing a transparent corset. So after wrapping it, I'll go ahead and stitch it on one end. Ensure that you wrap it very tightly, guys, please. It's not meant to be loose. Wrap it so tightly, and then I'll go ahead and trim out the excess. So guys, after doing that, at this point I'm trimming out, reducing the seam allowance. It's 1/2 inch, so I'm trying to reduce it to the barest minimum that I can. So if you're working with a skin net, at every point you have to be very careful, because anything can alter your efforts. The machine can alter your fabric, ironing can alter, and even scissors can even alter your fabric. So that's how bad it can be. So the next thing I'll simply do is to place my wrapped regeline bone on my corset mesh. So you can go ahead and use a chalk to draw your lines, illustrate your lines, your fashion lines, or you can eyeball just like me. I know what I want to do, so I'll just use my eyes and give the design of my choice. And if you notice that on the regeline bone, one part is sewn, so if you're going to be sewing on that part, ensure that you're top stitching right on the stitched part, and then you stitch the other side, trim out the excess and stitch on the other side. Okay, so I'll do this until I cover my style lines that I want. Okay, so as you can see me doing, just follow my step. It's a very easy step, but not as easy as it seems, because transparent corset requires a lot of time, a lot of carefulness. Okay, so if at this point I'm trying to also cover the seam line, where the part where I trimmed, I used my regeline bone to also cover that part. I don't want to waste so much time just stitching regeline bone because it requires a lot of time. So the style lines also includes a short bone at the extreme, at the hem area. So I'll just trim it out in such a way that it can lay properly, and then I'll go ahead and top stitch it just like I did the others. You stitch one end, trim out the excess, crossing the hem, and then stitch the other side. So after doing this is what I have, as you can see. So I mentioned earlier that the two nets is on a layer of 4, so I'm going to be overlaying it with extra 2. So at this point you work with your pins, make sure that you smoothing it out properly. When I mean properly, make sure that it is laying flat. So this is the first layer. I'll trim out the excess and then overlay again. Okay, so if you're working with StoneNet for this particular tutorial, or for this particular design, you can work with as much as 5 to 6 years. So like I mentioned earlier, I overlaid with I did 2-layer overlay, and then I went ahead to attach my lacing bar on, and I'm going to be showing you guys how I did this lacing bar. What I simply did here was to place the first 2. I'm going to be placing the third one tightly, closely to the other ones. You can see that the first 2 is so close, so the third one is going to be laid so close to the other 2, as you can see. So just stitch it properly and then follow the sewable lines and stitch. Okay, so after stitching it, guys, I'll go ahead and trim out the excess. As you can see, the next thing to do is to overlay with your fabric. This fabric is about 4.5 inch, which is the lacing bar. The regeline bone is 1/2 inch, and the 3 of them will be about 1.5 inches. So for the front and back, I have 3 inches. Then the seam allowance for overlaying will give me a total about 4.5 inches. So on the wrong side, I went ahead to stitch this part of the fabric, the crepe fabric placed on fold. You can see that I folded both ends, so I'm going to be stitching it closely to the regeline bone. It's so close, so close, guys. After stitching the wrong side, I'll flip it to the right side. I'm going to be using my pin to secure it. So take your time, guys. I'll use my pin to secure it. There are several ways you can do this. It's not just a standard. There's some people can actually place their regeline bone, stitch their regeline bone on the fabric before placing it on the mesh. Some actually stitch on the mesh before overlaying with the fabric. So whichever method works for you is fine. The most important thing that you're being able to use your fabric to cover up your regeline bone properly. Ensure that you are not stitching on your regeline bone, you're stitching directly on the fabric, as you can see me doing. And ensure that when you stop stitching, you're also capturing the other one at the back. Okay, guys, so this is what I have. So at this point, it's important you work with your pins. So you trim out the excess. As you can see, the next thing to do is to stitch in between the regeline bone on the fabric. So I was actually tracing mine with my hands. So While stitching, I will just monitor, ensure that I'm not stop stitching directly on my regeline bone. I'm stitching in between the regeline bone. That is the distance, as in between two bones, you run your stitch. So I'm going to be running 2 stitches on this fabric, okay, to create 3 channels. So after stitching this part, I'll go ahead and stitch the other part. So ensure that you're actually stitching in between the regeline bone and not directly on the regeline bone. So the real essence of this is to create our channels. Now the mid one will be for the lacing bar, while both sides will be stabilizing it with additional non-sewable bone to give it that strength that it's meant to have to withstand the pressure of the snatching. Okay, I hope I'm making sense. And this, you also need to leave a seam allowance for above and below. Seam allowance of about 3/4 of an inch or half of an inch above and below is so important, so that probably when you're closing your hem and doing other things, because we're not yet done, the non-sewable bone will not get into your seam allowance. So guys, the next thing to do is to use your bias fold to cover the upper side and the lower side. Okay, so this stage I'm going to be explaining what works for me, different strokes for different folks. So I'm going to be using a regeline bone of about 3/4 half an sorry, I'm going to be using a regeline bone of about 1/4 of an inch. You know, we have the half an inch and then we have the 1/4 of an inch. Now the one smaller, the lower one, or the smaller regeline bone, smaller than half an inch, I'm going to be placing it there before using my bias to overlay it, to cover it up. Okay, so I'm doing it for all the sides. I've done for the center, I've done for the side, the upper side. As you can see, I've done on one side. I'm also going to do it on the other side. So what I'll simply do is to also place my regeline bone on the hem. This is the hem, the lower part of the illusion net. You can see that I've also used my regeline bone. Like I mentioned earlier, it is not a standard. Not everybody places a regeline bone, but because you don't want your regeline bone to be altered when you're snatching or to experience wear and tear, there's need for you to do this. So now guys, to actually place my bias fold, you can see what I did, that I had to close the end first before creating my fold. Okay, so ensure that you do what I did. If you did not understand, there's need for you to rewind and look at it properly, how I folded the end before using my bias to fold over the hem. Okay, so at this point I am top stitching. After stitching one side, you flip over to the other side, fold your fabric by half an inch. Ensure that you fold your fabric and then you top stitch till you get to the end. Okay, when you get to the end, you do the same thing, you create your fold and then you top stitch. So if you have watched to this point, do not forget to support the channel by giving it a thumbs up. It's quite a process creating this tutorial, but it is what it is. We need to give our best to ensure that we give you what you want. Okay, so don't forget to support the channel by subscribing and then sharing the video and giving it a good thumbs up. So at this point, I trimmed out the excess thread on the fabric. Okay, so I have a tutorial on drafting this corset cup. I'm going to be dropping the tutorial as soon as possible, both the creating of this corset cup, the tutorial for the corset cup. I'm going to drop it. So at this point I went ahead to attach it, and then this is the finishing point, the finishing part of the tutorial. So you attach it. After attaching the cup, you go ahead and close up the seam allowance by piping it. Okay, so just pipe it with your fabric. Okay, so thank you so much for watching to this point, guys. I really appreciate all you do. Thank you for your support. I know I'm not where I want to be, but for every milestone I am grateful to God. I know that the best is yet to come. So support me, guys, and help me share, subscribe, and give this video a thumbs up. Thank you so much, guys. I will see you all in my next tutorial. Please keep praying for me. Thank you, and look out for my next video. God bless you all.